Hi, and welcome to Freshwaves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Suzanne Sherkin. Suzanne is a mother, an author, and a mediator. She has a wonderful story, and in honor of Pride, we are going to bring to you the story of Suzanne Sherkin, a woman who gave birth to 2 girls and now has a daughter and a son. This is Fresh Waves. We hope you enjoy the show. Good morning, Suzanne.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm well. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's great to have you. When I first heard your story months ago, was over a year ago now, I thought, you have an amazing story, but you also have an amazing way about you. And I think that probably comes from your professional designation. You're a mediator, aren't you?
I am.
So people are fighting like mad, and you're able to go, tut, tut, tut. Everybody be nice. Sort of.
Yeah.
I'm oversimplifying it, but still, what a great skill to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, were you born with that, or was it something that you thought at one point in your life, I'd like to control these ugly fights that I see?
Yeah, well, actually, no, it's not about controlling at all. I've learned a lot through being a mediator. Actually, I started out as a journalist, always wanting to use language and really liking to communicate and perfecting my communication. And then at some point, sort of after about 20 years behind the typewriter and then computer, I moved in front of audiences and began to speak instead of write. And found that I really loved working with people in how to communicate. And then a series of events and circumstances just sort of led me to mediation, and I hadn't planned on it. In fact, it was a mistake that I registered for a course. I had meant to do something else, and I registered for this mediation course. In the first half an hour, I said, "This is what I want to do for the rest of my life," and it has been really an amazing journey. All of my work in communications and facilitation and writing has been directed towards workplace. And so I've just morphed it into workplace mediation. And so what I find is that I'm using my skills as a communicator and a writer, really to pay attention to how people use language. Somewhere along the way, also, I picked up a trainer's certification in neuro-linguistic programming. Ooh. So I'm really paying attention to conscious and unconscious language and language use. And so I find that putting all of that together has really made me aware of how people communicate, how they think, how they present themselves, and I'm able to use the structure of mediation to invite people to listen. So it's not about controlling at all. It's about shifting them into a listening mode rather than a speaking mode, so that they can move into an awareness. And one of the Actually, also Stephen Covey comes in here. There's a line from his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I use so much. So there's a line that says, seek first to understand, then to be understood, which is the structure. And so that's how I get I help, I don't get people, but I help shift people into moving into that mode of thinking, to seek first to understand, so that they're the ones who put off their positional need to be heard mindset, breathe. I give them some approaches on how to do that so that they get to listen. And then, so that's the process. And the goal comes from a Rumi line, which is actually what I've put on the back of my now business card. And this is my favorite quote in the world from the poet Rumi. And the line is this: beyond the wrongdoings and the right doings is a field. I'll meet you there.
Lovely.
And that's my philosophy around how to invite people into a space of openness and mediation. And of course the word mediation comes from the Latin middle ground. And so that's about coming into the middle ground.
Wow, isn't that nice?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really lovely quote. It has all kinds of nice connotations, doesn't it? Okay, so this is our Pride show here on Freshwaves, and all of this comes from where I met you. And when I met you at a writing workshop where people were writing books. Some were the stories of their lives. And you were writing about your experiences with your son.
Yes.
Tell us a little about that.
So I am a mother of 2 children. I gave birth to 2 daughters. I now have a son and a daughter. So my daughter is 33 and my now son is 31. When my son was maybe 23, 24, he came to me and he said, "Ma, I want to show you some videos that now we call them blogs, but some videos that I've been looking at." And I said, "Okay, great." And I have a very close relationship with my kids, and so it's very open. And so I thought nothing of it. So my child at that time was named Aviva, and so Aviva and I just plopped on her bed. She opened up her laptop. I sat, actually, so I remember how I was sitting. So I was sitting my knees were on the floor and my elbows were on the bed watching this. And so we were there getting comfortable. And what I began to see were these pictures of, that just astonished me. It was person after person who was talking about their gender and questioning their gender. And occasionally there would be someone who would lift up their shirt and show off their scars on their chest. So after 10, 15 minutes, I was watching it. It took me a while to kind of focus in on what we were watching because it was so astonishing and
process it.
And I didn't know if this was a movie. I didn't know what I was being shown. And Aviva was just sitting quietly and I was just and I turned to her and I said, "What are we watching? What is this about?" And she turned to me and she said, "Ma, I think I'm a guy."
Now this is at the age of 24.
And so this is before Caitlyn Jenner, this is before Chaz Bono, this is before
Celebrity.
Orange is the New Black.
Right.
This is before anyone even heard, certainly before I heard the word transgender. I never thought about gender. It never crossed my mind to think about gender. It was not a conversation.
So did your daughter, when she was younger, was she the tomboy?
Well, I'll go back to that, but I'll just finish this moment, which was really an arresting moment, to be sure, because it was taking me into a very new realm. I'm a liberal thinker, a really open thinker. And this was before I was a mediator while I was still a journalist. And so I was used to having lots of information come to me and being really open and not judgmental about it. And so I'm a really broad thinker. I was not prepared for that. And so that evening, changed our lives because, that in that evening, I remember I couldn't breathe in the same way that I'm still stuttering and stammering. I mean, it's now almost, 8 years later, or I don't know how many years later it is, but I'm still stuttering about it because I still feel it in my body, that newness of information. And we talked about what that meant. So I said, what does that mean? Like, what does that actually mean? You're a guy. And she said, because I knew that Aviva had been struggling. I knew she'd been struggling her whole life. In fact, and this is what's really interesting about being a parent of a trans child, is that parents know. I can't say what the experience of a father is, but I know a mother. If the child has come out of your body, or even if you've raised the child from infancy, the child it intimately inside out. Mm-hmm. And I knew something. My spidey sense knew something from the time that she was about 3, that something was not quite the same as her older sister, who was such a girl. Yes, I can bring, offer examples, simple examples like, Lauren, is my daughter. I used to say older daughter, but now I say my daughter, who is such a girl. She loved dressing, if it would rain, let's say, she wanted, a pink, rain jacket and matching boots, and she wanted the Kermit the Frog boots, but God forbid she would get them dirty in a puddle, and so she would walk around a puddle so that her, everything would be really pristine and gorgeous, and, we would get her dresses, and she loved to be so pretty, and she was lovely, right?
And very feminine.
And really feminine, and she loved it. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, so I knew that when we were out for a walk, that was the experience with Lauren, and the experience with Aviva was that, Aviva would be wearing boots like,
belly boots, the black ones.
Oh my God. Right. And she would actually run out of her way, to find a puddle and jump into it, and the dirtier the better. Okay. So that's, that's just, okay, fun. That's fun. The other thing we grew up with that became just the family, quote, normal, was that when we would go shopping, from the time the kids were, 3, 4, 5, no, maybe 4 or 5, the way it went was, we would go into the girls section, and we would collect clothes for Lauren, because kids that age, they have to, every minute and a half they're growing, so we would get clothes for Lauren, and then we would go to the boys section and get clothes for Aviva, and then take the cart and go into the girls section, into the change room, and change. And that was just sort of normal. That was kind of what we did, and never really thought about it. And the same thing carried on in teens, and so the family, every family has its normal that you don't really think about. However, I just knew that there was just a way Aviva was behaving in the world that was very uncomfortable. A joyous, smart, interesting, heart-based child, but uncomfortable in her own body always. Her body grew really, really fast. Like so fast. Shopping for shoes from the time she was 12 was a nightmare. Her feet were size 12 at the age of 12.
Wow.
And for a girl, this is really, really bad news. Mm-hmm. Even though she didn't want to wear fancy shoes, she wanted to wear just runners. It was really bad. It was just, everything was out of whack. Nothing made sense. Her body was big and ungainly. She never wanted to talk on the phone, never wanted to... every time she had to go out to a family function, there would be a huge row. So none of these things individually actually amounted to an awareness, but they all kind of moved into me recognizing that this was a, quote, special child who's struggling. When she went to university from Toronto, outside of Toronto, to a small town, to university, and the Christmas of the first year she came back and she announced, to no one's surprise, that she was gay. And she just announced that, and I don't even remember. It was kind of a
Non-issue.
Non-issue. No, because nobody
was surprised.
Nobody was surprised. Aviva had a lovely boyfriends actually in high school, and but it wasn't. But her affinity was to hang out with girls, and and had a smart, intelligent, heart-based group just like her. So that's didn't create even a ripple in the family. And then so that she carried on, and that was when she was, I guess, 22. And then this, and so this was the end.
And that night,
the second or third year, I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Second, and that, and then this announcement, and so, that's what, and that changed everything. Yeah.
So as a mother, people have asked me in the past, just through conversations, so what would you do if your child ever told you that they were gay, or if they told you that they were trans? And I really didn't have an answer, because I don't really know. All I know is I would never stop loving them. Mm-hmm. And I mean, for you at that moment, when the shock wore off, was there not part of you that was sort of wishing that this wasn't the case? Because we always want what's easiest for our kids. We want them to have an easy, happy, carefree life. And choosing this path may not be so easy.
So, Bren, I just have to stop you there. And I'm looking at your face, and it's looking very scrunched, and I hear the word choosing. So I just need to make this really clear. This is not a path to be chosen.
Right.
Nobody would choose a path that was difficult. Nobody would. We're built in our bodies. We are built for comfort. We are built to survive. Mm-hmm. No one would consciously choose a path that put them in hardship, fear, anxiety, and possible trauma. Nobody would do that. Right. So this is not a choice, and that's, I mean, if there's one key message, there's a few key messages I want to land here, but that's the absolute first key message. This is not a choice. Just like your sexual orientation is not a choice.
I understand that, but there are women who have lived without having the physical change, without going through the surgeries and the hormones, and they've just accepted themselves in that way and lived that way. So when I was referring to choice, I'm thinking more the choice of really taking it to the next level. And is that what your daughter did? Did she actually have the surgery and the hormone?
Okay, so let me just clear up a few things too. So first of all, taking it to the next level, I just want to address that, and also your question about surgeries, I want to address that. So the first thing is, it's not a choice. It's about moving into your authenticity. It's about recognizing what your authentic self is. And in Aviva's case, now Skylar, and I'm no longer going to use the word Aviva. Okay. So it's Skylar now with pronouns of he, him. Skylar spent 4 years of his life feeling uncomfortable and not knowing how to move into comfort. Mm-hmm. And finally recognizing that this was what was meant for him. It was moving into a male expression. And so there's two words here and two concepts here I want to identify. In fact, the container of all this, the overall thinking around this, is that gender is a concept. And I want to just park that and bring it back and come back to it. Within that concept of gender being a concept, there is the two aspects of that. One is gender identity and one is gender expression. Mm-hmm. So gender identity is about how we think of ourselves. And so the reason I struggled with it, and maybe you're struggling with it too, and maybe many of your listeners are struggling with it, is because if the question never comes to you to ask about your gender identity, then you are what's called cisgender, CIS.
Right.
Cisgender. And cisgender, cis is actually a prefix, a Latin prefix, which means this side of. And it's actually the opposite of trans. Trans is a prefix, a Latin prefix, which means the other side of. So those of us, and I am cisgender, it means I've never questioned my gender. I'm born female. That's period. I've never really questioned that. Yeah. So I never wondered what it would be like to be a different gender. But Skylar is transgender because he does question his gender. So here's the thing. He questioned whether or not he was meant to be female. He questioned his gender identity, and it's how you feel internally. So just questioning, regardless of how you show up, just questioning invites the identification of being trans. If you and then if you choose to express that and show it outwardly, then that is actually a choice of how you express yourself. How you feel inside is not a choice.
Right. Absolutely.
And the more connected you can get with how you feel authentically inside, the more connected you are to your identity.
Right.
In some countries, it is actually, it's dangerous. It's illegal and dangerous to express yourself in any
Absolutely.
So I want to actually here make a difference and make it clear that sexual orientation, that is who our partners are, whether it's same sex or different sex or no sex, is a very different way of thinking than gender identity. Sexual orientation is different from gender identity. So a lot of people just squish those together.
Into one group, and it's not.
They're very, very different. Who you choose to be in partnership with is different than how you think about your gender.
Right.
So in many countries, you cannot be other than conventional male or female and have same-sex partners and show up as male or female.
Right.
And in how you were born. Canada is one of the blessedly lucky countries, or we are blessedly lucky in this country to have such brilliantly open, supportive human rights laws that support cultural identity, religious identity, sexual orientation, and gender identity. So someone who feels that they are not cis, someone who feels that they are uncomfortable in their gender, can actually step out and express themselves in different ways. So I'll just explain what that looks like.
We're going to have to do that in just a second, so hold that thought. Okay. We have to take our first break, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Suzanne, and we'll bring on Luke as well from the NCRA, which is the Governing Board of Community Radio Stations here in Canada. And it's a great topic of language, because we've just learned in the last 5 minutes how important language is, from broadcasting to the way we speak on the street to the way we speak in our families. Language is really key to communicating. You're listening to Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson, and we'll be back right after this. Stay tuned. Hi, this is Bren Masson, host of Fresh Waves. If you'd like to hear more Fresh Waves podcasts and broadcasts, you can check out our YouTube channel, Fresh Waves Radio. Hey, hit the subscribe button. We love to have subscribers. If you have stories or show topics that you would like to hear discussed, then just drop me a line, bren@freshwaves.ca. I'd be happy to hear from you, and we love to hear your stories. Now let's get back to the show with Suzanne Sherkin and Luke from the NCRA. And we're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. We're speaking this morning with Suzanne Sherkin, and joining us on the line right now is Luke Smith from the NCRA, which is the National Campus and Community Radio Association of Canada. And Luke, not only are you the head of education there at the NCRA, but you also have been the host of Queer Radio for the past 10 years, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly getting up there in age. I think we started in, I think it was the end of 2009, so it's nearly 10 years, yeah.
Wow. Suzanne was just speaking about the word choice, and we've heard that word used many, many times in discussions about sexual orientation and gender specifics or non-specifics, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with the pronouns now that you're doing a radio show, you're on the air all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing to kind of talk about here is to step back. I briefly worked for the Ottawa Police Service as a liaison to the LGBT community. It's important to note that I'm not trans myself. I'm cisgendered, which means sort of essentially, I don't know if you've gone over it, but cisgendered
yes, we
means
did.
My sex and identity and gender all line up. But when I was talking to police officers who maybe are pulling somebody over and their driver's license has the big old M on it, but, you know, they're in a dress and a hat and a wig, you know, how do you respond to that? So we've had lots of conversations around pronoun use, not just on our radio show, but also in training I've done with the police service. And the big thing is always to follow the lead of the person you're talking to. If, in the case of the person being pulled over, they go, oh, it's mom or miss whatever. The respectful thing is to not go, well, actually, I disagree. I think you're actually this. That's not a particularly respectful approach. And just sort of following their lead. And the big thing I tell police officers and people who listen to the show, Can Queer, is that everybody makes mistakes. I've had very close friends who've transitioned, and I frequently make the mistake of misgendering them, not on purpose. It's usually a slip of the tongue, especially if you've known somebody before a transition, kind of forgetting and learning the new one as a challenge. But as long as it's not purposeful or done to hurt somebody, I think that trans folks are willing to give you that space, but the respect has to come in both ways.
Mm-hmm. Suzanne, have you had that when your son first transitioned? How was it for you? Did you make the mistake often and say, oh, she, and then realize that you should correct yourself, or did it sort of just, as the transition happened, it was easy?
It definitely takes conscious awareness to shift pronouns with someone you've always called one pronoun or seen in one expression of gender, to shift into another. Even using his name, sometimes it's been 5-6 years, I occasionally will make a mistake, not outwardly, but in my brain, and I have to close it down. Other people, his father occasionally uses, misgenders, uses the wrong pronoun. But I will say that the more Skylar became, the more of a male expression Skylar took on, the easier it was to gender him easily, to not misgender him and to use the correct pronouns. I want to tell a little bit of a story around public bathrooms, but I don't want to take up Luke's time.
Oh, Luke, you're fine with that, aren't you? A quick story about bathrooms?
Absolutely, go ahead.
Okay, so here's where it gets potentially dangerous around transitioning and the different stages of transition, because transitions for anyone, whether it's male to female or female to male or anywhere in between, it doesn't just happen overnight. It's a process. It's a series of events, from changing the name to changing your pronoun to changing your hairstyle to changing how you look. And so it's not about surgeries necessarily. It's about how you show up. So in Skylar's case, for example, he, at the beginning of his transition, although he had changed his name and had cut his long dreads and had short hair and felt more male, he was still using the female public bathroom because he wasn't quite sure of himself yet. And he tells of a really horrible experience where he entered this public bathroom and he was aggressively yelled at, thrown at. I think the woman even, I don't know if she hit him or not, but she threatened to call the police if he didn't leave immediately. And that was really, really stressful. He tells a similar story, or a story of similar awfulness, a few months later when he actually went into a male bathroom, because he thought, okay, I can't go into women's bathrooms. Now I'll go into male bathrooms. And it wasn't clear yet where he was in his transition. He was followed out by two guys and beat up on the side of the road because they said, they were just taunting him about what gender he was. And
it's horrible. And you hear that with gay men as well who are chased out of public bathrooms and things like that. And when I hear a story like that, I honestly have to think how we haven't come as far as we think we have.
Well, public spaces are,
they're hard, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Luke?
I think it's a very dangerous time for trans folks. Some of them have passing privilege, and that's where, at 10 paces you can't quite tell. And there's a certain privilege to that, but I think not all trans folks are at that point. Maybe not all trans folks will ever be at that point. And, it's very dangerous for people. We know that in 2019 right now, we are at the same point of trans folks who have been murdered as we were for the whole of 2018.
Oh my goodness.
At least out of the US, but violence against trans folks is high. Ottawa has one of the highest rates of hate crime violence in Canada. That's one of the little-known facts. And hate crime violence across Canada is on the rise, including violence against trans folks as well. So I think this is something that, I hate to say that, but I feel like the experiences that your son have had is sort of just a small example of what people up and down the country are experiencing. What
a shame. It's, I don't know, in a world where I think all we need is love. Why can't we just love each other? I have an issue with the word tolerance, quite honestly. I don't like the fact that a lot of the courses that you take or the people that are talking, because again, this is about the communication, when they talk about equity and equality and the differences, they use the word tolerant all the time. And my definition of tolerant, the way I see the word, is if you're sitting at a restaurant and you're on a date night without your kids and someone else's 3-year-old is under your table chewing on your shoe and getting their chocolate ice cream hands all over your dress, you're not going to scream at them and kick them out from under the table. You will grit your teeth, smile at them and say, "Why don't you go back to your own table, sweetie?" Through gritted teeth, thinking, "You miserable little piece of nonsense, get out of my way and stop getting chocolate on me." But you tolerate their behavior because they're 3. And I don't think that tolerance is where we want to be. I think we want to be in more of a place of understanding, compassion, acceptance. Those are words I like to hear used because they give a different connotation. You know what I mean?
I think the word tolerance actually has a lot of history in it in the gay movement. So not necessarily with trans folks, but it's been a very long haul to get equal rights in Canada. In fact, this year we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the partial decriminalization of homosexuality. So it's been 50 years that there's been work on this. And, 50 odd years ago, the best we could hope for was tolerance. So it became the word that presented the least amount of barriers to people. And maybe now, 2019 is not 50 years ago. Maybe now we need to reevaluate that and look to a new word. But it's important to remember where that use of the word came from, and it was very much that sort of easy to reach target for people who back in the day.
Right. And so now 50 years later, we hope that we can move beyond just tolerance to a place where it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter, you'd hope. But it seems to still, which is kind of sad. I mean, just recently, Jason and I were parked because of a traffic jam where there was a man standing on the street in Toronto on a soapbox preaching anti-gay rhetoric, and he was nasty and mean, and the negative, ugly vibe coming from this man was just awful. And I honestly, in my little naive, I live in Stouffville and I don't go downtown very much anymore way, thought, I was shocked that this was happening in my city. I still consider Toronto my city. And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed by this awful negative behavior.
It's not just Toronto. I think a lot of listeners might be thinking, well, it's Toronto, it's the GTA, it's a massive metropole. There's been a massive uptick in extreme rights, vitriolic rhetoric, just hate preachers coming in from Texas and Alberta, but also some people coming in from the Kitchener, Waterloo area. In Dunnville, there was a pride that was where some violence erupted just in 2018 and in 2017, where these hate preachers are coming in and protesting pride. You should look it up. There's a nice stage in the park. Everyone's having a good time, and they're stood in front of the stage with these massive banners with a bullhorn, just shouting at everyone in the crowd about how they've sinned and how awful they are. I mean, and that's 2018. It happened in Hamilton just a couple of weeks ago. These things are still happening, and what we're seeing is that this sort of hate-filled rhetoric is actually a bit on the rise in Canada, more than on the decline.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because Suzanne and I were also talking about the fact that education and the way we speak is so key. We have to get to a point where people understand what's going on. I was actually speaking to someone who told me, they're very religious, born-again Christian, and they told me that you can be fixed. That homosexuality is something that can be fixed. And I said, no, you're born with a way that you identify. And I realized I had to back off of this because she said that there are places that you can go to where you can be fixed. And then you can have a nice life and have a family and children and live in a house of God. And wow, I was really shocked.
There are a lot of churches out there which are not only accepting but welcoming of people. I think the Metropolitan Church, the United Church, and there's a few other ones that are really sort of leading the way in sort of acceptance, but also the grace of God and the importance of love. And I think it's important that there is a space for Christianity and sexual and gender identity to kind of come together. It is unfortunate that in Canada there are conversion therapy that does exist. The federal government hasn't tackled it. It's being raised on a province-by-province basis. I think 5 or 6 of them have banned conversion therapy for people under 18. But it is shocking and sad that it still exists, despite all of the associations of psychologists and psychiatrists, and even the World Health Organization have said that not only is it a debunked science, but it causes more psychological damage than it purports to help.
Yeah. So, Suzanne, for your son, did he go through an emotional turmoil of this, or was he just, by the time he decided, so sure of what he wanted to do that there wasn't a question?
That's a really good question, Bren. By the time he came to it, he was sure that was the right understanding, the right identity for him. Getting there into an expression of that was really where the uncertainty came and where the fear-based behavior and attitudes came, because he wasn't, I mean, as Luke has said, it can be a dangerous place out there. And while he was lucky, and I am so happy that I was able to provide a safe house literally for him, that is not the way it is out there in the world. Anywhere on the streets, it's not always safe. And so he wasn't always sure how to express himself. I remember the very first time that he had to put on a jacket, and he actually went to an event as a guy, and he was so nervous. He was nervous seeing his father because he didn't know if he would be seen as pretending to be a guy. And he stood in front of me with his jacket and his shirt, and he said, "Do I look like a guy, Ma? Do I look okay?" It was very cute, because he wasn't sure. It was all new territory for him. And so now 5 years later, he's just who he is, and there's an ease about him. But the journey was
a difficult one.
Yes, it was unsure, for sure.
Okay. So Luke, how do you find that over the years then your radio show has been accepted? Because I'm sure that way back when, 9 years ago, 10 years ago, queer radio was not an accepted broadcast stance.
Yeah, there's always been the odd program here and there on various, typically community or campus licensed stations. But one of the things that's quite neat with my show is, we're broadcasting in Vancouver, drive time, which you would expect. Vancouver's a bit of a lefty city, if I may say so. But our show is also broadcast in Penticton. It's broadcast over in Halliburton, and we're in the majority of the stations that carry our show are in rural and remote and small towns. And I think that really goes a long way to saying really what the mission of the show was, which was to create a space where these conversations are more normalized. I did want to quickly pick up on one of the things that Suzanne mentioned about being perceived as pretending to be a guy. That's one of the biggest barriers that trans folks have faced. We did a show recently about Morgan Auger out in Vancouver, who ran for office there, and Bill Walcott, who's a bit of a hate preacher in Saskatchewan, went and pamphleted the riding she was running in. She could have been the first trans MP. And the pamphlet said, Morgan Auger is pretending to be a woman. What else are they hiding?
Oh, my goodness.
It was kind of promoting that stereotype that they're deceitful, that they're misleading people, which is not remotely accurate. And Walcott actually lost a human rights tribunal, where the tribunal really made very clear that the trans identity as a thing is frankly not up for debate. You cannot debate the existence of trans people in Canada. The laws and the court case law have moved simply beyond that. So trans identity is not up for debate, and folks who are trans are not pretending to be one thing or another. They very much are how they identify.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point. And again, boy, sad that would happen in this country in this day and age. But it does. Well, Luke, I'm going to let you go now. So nice of you to join us this morning. I know you're super busy and everything, so I do appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Freshwaves.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Luke. Well, that was Luke Smith, who is the head of education at the Campus and Community Radio Association of Canada, and he's also the host of Queer Radio in Ottawa that broadcasts all across Canada. So, Suzanne, communication is the key. Were you a mediator before this all happened, or
no?
So that was part of your journey too.
Yeah, it was.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah. But mediation actually came easily to me because I just I think I'm just built that way, where I really like to see the middle ground of things.
And that's a nice way to be, but it's a difficult place to be sometimes. And as a parent, it's a tricky place to be sometimes. I mean, I have 4 kids, and when they all get going, boy, do I ever wish I had some training in mediation.
Yeah, I actually don't find it difficult at all. It takes training. I really had my hat off to you. 4 kids is a lot.
Yes, it is.
And so the more you can move into hearing people and not being positional about anyone. It doesn't mean giving up what you believe in, but it means giving everyone respectful listening. It's
a tricky place to be.
It is.
Well, that's it for Fresh Waves this week. I hope you've enjoyed this fascinating interview with Suzanne Sherkin and Luke Smith from the NCRA. Both of these people have had incredible journeys, and they have wonderful ways of looking at the world. If we could all just see the world with love, kindness, respect, and compassion, what a fabulous place this would be. I have a good feeling that we will get there someday. We're well on our way. We hope to bring you more shows like this on Fresh Waves, and if you have stories that you would like to share, please drop me an email at bren@freshwaves.ca. We hope that you've enjoyed the show today, and we hope that you tune in again. If you'd like to hear more of our podcasts and broadcasts, you can go to our YouTube channel, Fresh Waves Radio. We love to hear from you, and we love to have subscribers, so hit that subscribe button for all the Fresh Waves podcasts. One conversation can change a mind. One conversation can change the world. We'll talk to you again next time on Fresh Waves. Hi, this is Bren Masson, host of Fresh Waves. Fresh Waves is a podcast, and it's a broadcast. We are broadcasting on Whistle FM, 102.9 on the FM dial when you're in Stouffville, and anywhere in the world at whistlefm.ca. That's 102.9 Whistle FM. We're on Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. We would love for you to join us. What a great way to start your day with some fresh waves. We'll catch you then.